Hello, Salim Omar here. Welcome to another episode of the Straight Talk About Small Business Success podcast. I'm really excited. I'm joined by a guest. His name is Doug Utberg. Doug, welcome.
Thank you. And thank you for pronouncing my name right. Not everybody does. So that is one notch in your favor.
Awesome. Great. Good stuff. And I'm joined today by my co-host, Rod Dillo, CPA. Rod, thank you for being here as well.
Thank you for having me. You got my name right too.
Good. Now that we are on the right track with pronouncing the names correctly, Doug has a very interesting and colorful background. And instead of me trying to share it, I'm going to ask Doug to share a little bit of his colorful background and his backstory.
Sure. So, coming out of undergrad right around 2000 or so, I actually went and started to work for Intel Corporation in finance, and so I feel the kinship with the CPAs, because we're all part of the accounting and finance family, and so I ended up working at Intel for about 17, 18 years, and then I ended up moving over to Lattice Semiconductor, which is also in the tech space, and so of course, I was going through the corporate ladder thing, and of course, I was also doing the thing where, you grow for a little while and then you sort of hit a roadblock and then you kind of try to pivot around it and you hit another roadblock and you try to pivot around it. And eventually I said, okay, I need to try that. I need to take the show on the road and I needed to go somewhere else. So what I did was I was over at Lattice Semiconductor and I was the director of their program management office in information technology. Funny part is that even though I was over in IT, the chief information officer didn't like dealing with finance or doing the budget. So I ended up owning the budget. So I did just as much, if not more finance in IT than I did at my latest roles in finance because I was managing the data system team before over at Intel. But what ended up happening was at the very beginning of the pandemic, the person who hired me, he was moved out and a new chief information officer was parachuted in from Silicon Valley. Well, he did the normal Silicon Valley move, which is he got rid of everybody who was in the old guy's inner circle. I was first on the list. I got a half-hour meeting on my calendar with no subject. And the first thing he said was, okay, well, unfortunately, we have to eliminate your position. HR comes on the line. My network access is cut off and that damn terminated. And then I get a package to my personal email. It was probably one of the least, probably one of the, how do I want to say, pretty much like one of the worst possible experiences. If you think about, okay, how do you really have a humanizing experience? What's kind of middle of the road? And then what's the absolute bottom of the barrel where you go 4 standard deviations past the bottom of the barrel? That's where I was at. And so what I ultimately came out of that at was I was like, okay, I can, basically I can, go out, try to find another corporate job, which I did. I probably put in about 300 or 400 applications, and mostly I just got ghosted, just nothing. And then, I think I ended up having going through a couple of interview strings. In both cases, I was one of about somewhere between 150 and 200 applicants. And in both cases, I came up short, right? I got the feedback that, hey, you were really good, but you weren't quite at the top of the heap. And then I was like, all right, I can either keep hitting my head against the wall here, or I can figure out how to do my own thing. And where I'm at right now is I'm in the midst of figuring out how to do my own thing, which in my experiences means that it's a combination of hustles. So like, for example, I might do a contract role for a little while. I might do a short-term consulting role for a little while. Of course, I'm running my own podcast, but of course, the whole thing with the podcast is that it takes a while before it's self-sustaining from a monetary perspective. Podcasts are a labor of love for a good amount of time. Now, the great advantage is that the content literally lives forever. It's not like a Facebook Live where it's gone the moment you record it. It lives forever. It is there indefinitely. And so as you build it up over time, there's a compounding value effect. You just have to live long enough for that compounding value to happen. And so, one of the things that I personally have a big passion about for both small business and larger enterprises, but from different angles, is really about, kind of putting together what I call a world-class team. Now, back when I was at Intel, they wasted a whole bunch of money with people like Bain and Hackett on doing kind of world-class benchmarking. And usually that resulted in some form of, hey, you need to go and you need to cut a whole bunch of money out of your spending. And in Intel's case, that was precisely right, because they were, had double or triple exposure in a whole bunch of different scope areas. But of course, like most big companies, they went about doing it in precisely the wrong way, which is where they said, which is where basically they got a whole bunch of, vice presidents and directors in a room, and they said, okay, we need to figure out how to cut X million dollars out of our spending profile. And oddly enough, nobody in the room ever thought, hey, my team is completely duplicative of somebody else's. Why don't you just get rid of one of our teams and redeploy our people? Of course not. No, what they do is they go and figure out, where do we chop individual contributor roles, so that every time you go through this process, the company ends up getting more and more and more top heavy. And this isn't to pick on Intel. This happens at just about every company that follows what I call the General Electric religion, which is, the Jack Welch General Electric in the 80s and 90s kind of became a darling of corporate America. And this whole thing of having multiple layers of management, where they have a really, really exhaustive rating and ranking process that requires multiple layers of management. But what ultimately ends up happening with that type of paradigm is that in order to ascend, instead of being good at doing something of value to the shareholders, you become good at internal politics. And so after a while, you get paid a whole lot of money, you have a really impressive title, but you've become so disconnected from whatever you started doing, whether it's a finance, whether it's marketing, whether it's HR, whether it's engineering, and you get to where you focus all of your time on the internal corporate politics. And so I think what I really see as a world-class team is to really break that mold, go together, put together a flatter organization structure, and replace a lot of things that a lot of companies do with human effort, with either repeatable systems that you can outsource, or ideally with technology where you can automate it. Because I think if you do this, it does two things. Number one is it lets you run a more effective business, which I think is the primary benefit. But then number two is that it changes the economics so that you can afford to pay more for your individual contributors, which is what we're seeing right now in the environment, which is where, acquiring talent is getting really, really expensive. And trying to do that inside of a 1990s style General Electric hierarchy is getting to where it's, it becomes uneconomical very fast. So that was a really, really long answer to a brief question.
Yeah.
So let me know if there's anything in there you want to unpack.
Yeah, totally. There was a lot that you shared there, and I think we should unpack that. I mean, one of the big expenses that Rod and myself, when we're advising small business owners and we're looking at their profit and loss statement and we're looking through their expense items, one of the bigger expenses is payroll, right, Rod?
Yes.
You'd
Yes.
agree?
Oh, yeah. It's
Payroll is one
always
of the
one or
bigger,
two.
Yeah.
yeah. And so it's like, how do we make this more streamlined? How do we make it more effective? This payroll expense or an asset, however, one sees it. But it's like, what are some of the things that, Doug, a small business owner should do to make, if a business owner listening to this has 5
Yeah.
employees, what are some of the things they can do to make their team world known or world
Yeah.
renowned or
Yeah.
world
World
effective,
class. Yeah, exactly.
world class? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so the first thing that I would say is, as much as you can, segment your whatever you do operationally into documented processes. Now, I'm a little bit of a nerd this way, and so I'm a fan of the APQC, or American Professional Quality Center, process classification framework. Now you don't need to have a giant PCF folder for everything, but what it does is it creates a framework for saying, okay, processes, say in marketing, kind of, this is where we store all of our marketing processes. This is where we store our finance processes, et cetera. And like, one of the things that I do for my business is I have a goal of every week, I try to document 2 to 4 extra processes. So I'm not going to get there in a month, but if I give it a number of years, I will get quite a few things documented. Well, there's a beautiful magic thing that happens when things are documented, especially if they're documented in a way that a fairly low-skilled person can handle it. And that is, what you can do is, there will be some things that you can either code into a system, or you can hire somebody, say from someplace like Philippines or India, or one of the developing economy places, for a for considerably less than it would cost in a developed market like the United States or the UK. Now, the way that a lot of companies, a lot of big companies stumble over their own feet this way is that what they'll do is they'll say, okay, we have a team in the United States that's really expensive. What we're going to do is we're going to ship this work over to, say, over to the Philippines, or to say to Penang, Malaysia, or out to India, or down to Costa Rica. And, but this team that they have, say in the US or UK or Europe or wherever, essentially they'll say something like, okay, what we want you to do is go close the books on a monthly basis. They'll go, okay, go close the books. All right, Costa Rica team, go close the books. They go, all right, well, what do we need to do? Well, just go figure it out. When you have these, when you have offshore teams and you don't have a really clear articulation of what needs to be done, they'll just flounder. I call that wasting time for less money. So the first thing you can do is get to where your stuff is really well documented so that you can assign pieces of it to a developed resource in a developing economy, and take advantage of geographic arbitrage. Geo arbitrage is real, but everybody walks right past the amount of process standardization documentation you need in order to really make that a reality. I think another thing that can happen is that there are a lot of processes that many small and large companies execute with people that can be done with technology. And especially if you're a small business, this is a place where small businesses have a huge advantage, because there is a ton of tech out there in the way of, like, say, CRMs, autoresponders, things like that, that can automate repetitive tasks, and they're really not that expensive. Because when you get into like the enterprise software space, stuff gets ridiculously expensive really fast. But the small business stuff is usually pretty affordable.
What would be some of those technologies? I mean, both pro and con, because
Yeah.
What would be ones that would be beneficial, and then where are the traps at in technology?
Yeah, so I think that's an excellent question, by the way. So I think the guiding light that you want to kind of keep in mind anytime you're looking at technology is going to say, okay, is this replacing manual labor, or is this requiring more manual labor? And in a lot of cases, you'll have to put a little bit of labor in to configure and set up and establish your technology. But, like, for example, one of the things I would think is is sales and marketing. So a traditional way that a lot of companies will do sales and marketing is that they'll either go to, like, say, trade shows, which involves a certain amount of manual labor, but it's one to many, or what they'll do is, they'll have a sales team that just gets on the phone and starts calling people. That is the oldest, least effective sales model in the world. And it's how every insurance agency, every financial planning practice, just about any direct sales industry on the face of the planet is run. Whereas in a lot of cases, what you can do is, either through digital advertising, through places like Facebook or LinkedIn or wherever, or Google, or through direct mail, what you can do is you can create and hone lists of your ideal client, target market directly to them with some kind of offer, and get them to come to you so that you can really focus those people's effort. I think that probably more than anything else is a place where a lot of companies can really derive benefits, because, of course, right, growing your revenue is one of the toughest things to do, and most small businesses don't really have that great of visibility into which marketing is producing what results, because if it's not something where you have a direct response, you don't know what drove people to come up with your service. And so, as I'm fond of saying, right, the amount of money that you spend on a marketing medium should either be zero, or or as much as you can possibly afford, or as much as you can possibly pay. The answer being that, for example, if you have, say, a direct response ad plus lead magnet, plus conversion cycle, where that for every dollar you put in, you're going to make $4 back within the next 2 months, how much would you spend on that? And the answer is every nickel that you could borrow until the ad stopped working. On the other hand, if you had something where, say, for every dollar you spend, you'll make somewhere between 50 cents and $3 in the next 2 to 5 years, how much should you spend on that? Well, no more than your budget allows, because you don't know how fast you're going to get repaid. And I think that, that mind shift is probably one of the most important things that you can do, because I think the places where a lot of businesses get where a lot of businesses run into a roadblock is that you don't really know where you should press the gas and where you should be pumping the brakes.
And that's where technology can come in, keeping tracking, right? I mean,
Yes.
really knowing what's working, what's not.
Yeah.
And so that you can do more of what's working and do less of what's not working.
Precisely. And I think you just said it right there. The big importance is that when you have that visibility into knowing what your return on investment is, then you can get more of your functions out of this is our budget. If we can't go over our budget for any reason. It's like, well, whenever you have things that are ROI driven instead of budget driven, then your budget doesn't matter anymore, because if your ROI is significantly higher than 100%, there's no, okay, we don't have budget for this. It's no, as long as the ROI hits your threshold, put as much into it as you possibly can.
Yeah. Coming back to creating an effective team.
Yeah.
How important is incentive-based compensation?
Well, and I differ from a number of people here, and that I actually think that I see compensation as as table stakes. So however you structure compensation, you're going to need to be competitive to competitive plus. And the way that I look at it is, for every extra hoop that you ask people to jump through, whether it is being on site versus virtual, or whether it's you're asking for, say, secondary skill sets. Like, for example, if you're looking for a say you're looking for an IT project manager. If you're looking for an IT project manager who also has construction experience, and say who also has logistics experience, and who also has a finance background, if you try to do that and then compensate them in the IT project manager salary band, they might say yes, but you're not going to retain them for long. And then let's say you throw on top of that you want them to be on site, say 3 to 4 days a week, as opposed to working remote. You're going to need to compensate extra for that. Now, in my view, I think that the people fit with the organization is probably, once your compensation is in the right realm, is probably going to be what your most important piece is. If your compensation isn't right, you're going to lose the people no matter what you do. Now on the other hand, if your compensation is right and you have a toxic organization, you're going to lose the people also. But otherwise, I think how the compensation is structured is probably less important than making sure that you're at least in the range for what you're asking for, and then also that the people have a really good fit into their team, and or if you have the type of company where there is a career path, that you're helping them along with that. If in a lot of small businesses, there's not necessarily a career path for people. The way that I like to approach that is to just be upfront with it and say, hey, look, right now, say we're a 5-person team. I don't necessarily have a manager, senior manager, VP path for an individual person. And so that means I understand that at some point you may want to move on. Instead of keeping that secret, when that time comes, talk with me about it and I will help you. Because I think that does two things. One, it gives you information that's very valuable, because then it tells you that you need to start looking for somebody, say 1 to 3 months before you would have known otherwise. And then two is that it signals to that person that you actually care about them, and it will make them think twice when they're leaving, because there is no guarantee that whoever you're moving toward actually cares about your career or not.
Yeah, this is awesome. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Rod, you've got some questions?
Yeah, I do. I have one, and this kind of goes on the team and the culture that we brushed on a little. I mean, one of the big things with entrepreneurs and small business is that you end up, the small business tends to eat the day. Yeah. And it's hard to balance that life. How do you have, you're experiencing this yourself. Yeah. How do you balance those family demands and the demands of that small business, and get that balance that allows you to still have both?
Yeah, well, and I think the way that I do it is a little unique to me. So in my situation, in addition to all the other balls that I'm juggling, my daughter, well, my son and daughter are both, their birthdays are both in April, as is mine. So my son's about to turn 13 and my daughter's about to turn 16. So they're both in what I call the full-time taxi service age. I am
Mhm.
really looking forward to when my daughter gets her driver's license, because hopefully that will free up a bit of our time. But for right now, oh, by the way, they both go to a private school that's a half hour away from our house. Now, the good news is we have a really nice house on acreage. The bad news is we drive everywhere. And so, but of course, this creates, a more of a crunch that the type of crunch that you're talking about. And so the way that I approach it is I am very much a family first person. So what that means is that, I make sure that we fit our kids' schedules, that we work around that we're able to accommodate their activity schedules. My daughter does dance, my son does scouts, and I'm the committee chair for a scout troop. So what I do is I say, okay, those are the big rocks in the jar. Those are the things that everything else works around. And then for the rest of the pieces that I put in, I say, okay, well, you prioritize what's going to be first, second, third. How does all that shake out? And then at some point, then you just draw the line and you say, I just understand that I'm drawing the line. And that means that there is value I'm going to leave on the table. And I've decided in advance that I'm okay with that. That's the way I do it. Now I think if you're mentally oriented the other way, then what you'll be doing is you'll be drawing the line saying that I understand there's some family pieces that I'm going to miss out on, and I'm okay with it. Now, that's not the way I'm oriented, but I understand that's how some people are. But I think the big thing is to say, at some point, you have to draw the line and just walk away until tomorrow. And I think deciding where that is in advance and how you're going to approach it is, I think, what helps to avoid that. Maybe not avoid that anxiety that things aren't being done, because I feel just like everybody else. I always feel like I should be getting 10 times as much stuff done as I actually do. Now, that's actually not reasonable, but you wouldn't be in business for yourself if you had reasonable expectations of yourself. You want to be exceptional. That's why you're
Mhm.
doing your own thing. If you wanted to be normal, you'd be normal. I'm assuming people listening to this want to exceed normalcy. Otherwise, you wouldn't have your own business.
Thank you. That was really good. I appreciate that.
Yeah, this is awesome. We are coming very close to finishing
Yeah.
this episode. Uh, Doug, what's a question we didn't ask that we should have asked?
Let's see. I always struggle with that one, because I keep thinking of different dynamics. I think the one thing that I would think is, what's the right next action for say for your listeners to take. And I don't necessarily know what the answer to that question is, but I know that's always the question you should be asking, right? Is based on where I'm at right now, what is the most important one next thing that I should be doing? And at least that's the way that I try to orient my days, weeks, months, etc. Is because whenever you're in a highly dynamic environment, you don't know what 5 years from now is going to look like. So hopefully 5 years from now, all of us will be go billionaires or whatever, which probably will be equivalent to about $50,000 in income with inflation. But hopefully in 5 years, all of us will be horrendously successful. But I have no clue what the now to their path is going to look like. And so in a lot of cases, what you have to do is you have to say, okay, based on what I know about everything I'm doing, how does that come back to the one thing I need to be doing next? And I think that, if, it's kind of an oscillating view of, okay, I'm looking at everything, and then I crystallize that down to one thing I'm going to do. And then you expand your view back out to everything, and then it comes back to one thing that I'm going to do. Is if and I'm just as guilty of trying to juggle 10 things at once as anybody else. And every time I do it, I'm always like, God, I feel like I was busy all day and I didn't get anything done. Is bringing that back to one thing that you're going to do is is really critically important, because if you compound that over time, you'll actually end up accomplishing far more than you might think. Because most people, myself included, throughout my whole corporate career, don't get nearly as much done as they actually think they do. They say, okay, I was really busy. I processed a lot of emails. But did I get that one or two or three things done that I really wanted to move myself forward?
Wow, that was powerful. And there's a book on the one thing by, his name is Gary Keller.
Yeah.
He owns a very successful real estate company, but yeah, it's the one thing,
Yeah.
it's really the one most important thing that really it's coming down to bringing that focus, right? And making sure that it's all the clutter, all the distractions, all the so many things, but what's the one thing that's going to take you further?
Yeah.
I really like that.
Yeah. And you also have to understand that one thing may change multiple times throughout the point of the day, because there's the one thing like that big goal, say like, for example, okay, say you're talking Gary Keller, he is trying to grow Keller Williams into a world-renowned brand, right? Okay, well, that's not something I can do today. So like, for example, one of the things that I might be trying to do today is I go, okay, so I need to set my podcast release schedule because I'm behind on that. Okay, that's my one thing for the next 30 minutes. Okay, well, after that, I'll, as I say, go narrow and then go broad. Start, say narrow. Okay, I got through that. Now go broad. Let's take a look at all the different things I'm looking at. What is that next one thing? And so it becomes a process of, dynamically, survey your whole field of opportunities and then turn that into your next one thing, and then start oscillating back and forth. And I think that if you do that, you'll make a lot more progress than you might think if you compound it out over a few weeks or months.
Yeah, that's awesome. Good stuff. Rod, did you have a question?
I'm really impressed. I appreciate the time on this.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things, and I think this goes, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it for a second, is, and it kind of goes with the one thing is, you hear people talk about, oh, I'm a multitasker. But I've read a lot of studies that say in reality, human beings can do one thing at a time.
Yeah.
And in reality, you're just picking up when you're multitasking, you're not really doing anything. What's your take on that?
Well, I would say human beings can only do one thing well at a time. And generally speaking, there's a lot of people who have become skilled at doing many things poorly. And so most people who give the appearance of multitasking, what they've essentially learned how to do is pretend like they're paying attention so that somebody who is observing them feels that they're engaged while they are actually giving about 20% of their effort to something else. It's like one of my jokes that I say, people always say, oh, well, can you X? And I always say, hey, I can do anything poorly. Asking whether I can do something or whether I can do it well are two totally different questions. So multitasking ultimately comes down to doing multiple things poorly at once. If you're looking to do something well, that can only be done in single file.
Thank you.
This is awesome.
I just want to say, I really appreciate you guys having me on the show today.
Yeah, no, it's great. And I appreciate the information you've shared, the gems you've shared. If listeners want to reach out to you, what's a good place? How do they do that?
Oh, thank you for asking. So my website is terminalvalue.biz. That's terminalvalue.biz. And then my podcast, the Terminal Value Podcast, is just terminalvaluepodcast.com. And then you can subscribe through Apple, Spotify. It's on all the aggregators, just like every other podcast. But of course, got my contact form. I can subscribe to my weekly information digest. But yeah, I'd love for your listeners to reach out.
Awesome, great. Thank you, Doug, so much for being on the show. Thanks, Rod.
Thank you, Salim, for having me.
All right, likewise.